A medieval sword exists that modern science cannot recreate using the tools of its own time. This video uncovers 25 diagrams of objects whose very metal should not exist based on when they were made. We are going to explore mysterious artifacts, impossible alloys, and technological wonders that challenge the accepted story of human progress. You will question everything you thought you knew about ancient innovation by the time we finish. How did a 2,000-year-old device contain gears more precise than an 18th century clock? Why does a massive iron pillar stand rust-free after 16 centuries? These are not just curiosities, they are evidence of something unexplained, something that rewrites history. What if our timeline of discovery is fundamentally wrong? The science of metallurgy provides the very ruler by which we measure these mysteries. Think of it not as a simple craft, but as a complex language written in fire and ore. Every culture, every era, speaks this language with a distinct accent defined by its available tools and knowledge. An ancient blacksmith, for instance, would typically use a bloomery furnace. This was a simple clay or stone chimney where bellows forced air over burning charcoal. The heat would reduce iron ore into a spongy mass of metal and slag called a bloom. This bloom then had to be repeatedly hammered while hot to squeeze out the impurities, a laborious and imprecise process. The resulting wrought iron was soft, malleable, and often inconsistent. Controlling the carbon content to create harder steel was an art of guesswork and luck, achieved by occasionally reheating the iron in a charcoal bed. This was the expected technological vocabulary of the medieval world, so when we find an artifact that speaks with the crisp, precise dialect of the industrial age, it is as shocking as finding a modern microprocessor in a steam engine. These objects are not just old, they are fluent in a language that had not yet been invented. They possess uniform alloys, sophisticated heat treatments, and purity levels that should have been impossible to achieve. This foundation turns a curious old object into a screaming anomaly. It allows us to separate the conventional from the truly inexplicable. And with that understanding, we can now look at our first diagram, an object that defies its own time with silent, rust-proof elegance. Rising from the depths of the Aegean Sea, a corroded lump of bronze and wood would become one of the greatest puzzles in the history of technology. Discovered by sponge divers in 1900 and one near the island of Antikythera, the mechanism was initially overlooked amidst more glamorous statues and artifacts from the same shipwreck. It was not for another 50 years that scholars, using X-ray technology, would peer inside and realize they were looking at a machine of breathtaking complexity. This was not a simple navigational tool or an astrological toy. It was a precise, hand-powered orrery designed to predict celestial events with astonishing accuracy. The device could track the movements of the sun and the moon, predict lunar and solar eclipses, and even model the irregular orbit of the moon. It was, in every sense, an analog computer. But its existence in the 2nd century before the Common Era makes absolutely no sense. The craftsmanship locked within its 82 surviving fragments is the core of the mystery. The gears are not crudely cast. They are precision cut from bronze, with intricate triangular teeth that interlock with a perfection that should not have been possible for another 1,800 years. This level of mechanical sophistication simply did not exist in the ancient world. We have no other artifacts from that era, or for centuries after, that display anything close to this complexity. It is a complete outlier. The metallurgy deepens the mystery. The bronze alloy used in the gears has a remarkably consistent tin content, around 5 to 7%, which was carefully controlled to give the metal the perfect balance of strength and resistance to wear. This is not the work of a lone genius tinkering in a shed. This consistency points to a standardized, sophisticated refining process, the kind you would expect from an established industry, not a one-off experiment. The low level of impurities like lead and arsenic further suggests a knowledge of metallurgical chemistry that historians never knew the Greeks possessed. They understood that cleaner metal meant more reliable, longer-lasting machinery. So how did they do it? What tools did they use to cut these tiny, perfect teeth on gears sometimes just a few millimeters across? We have found no evidence of the machine tools like gear cutters or fine files that would be necessary for such work. The mechanism stands as a silent, brilliant monument to a level of technological achievement that the history books tell us was impossible. It hints at a lost lineage of engineering, a school of thought whose other works were perhaps melted down for scrap or lost to time. Was this device a unique prototype, or was it merely one of many? Its discovery forces us to ask a profoundly unsettling question. How much knowledge has been truly lost to the ages? While the Antikythera Mechanism hides its genius within a complex clockwork of bronze, our next anomaly stands in plain sight, a silent sentinel of impossible iron. In the heart of Delhi, a 7-ton column of pure wrought iron has been exposed to the elements for over 1,600 years, and it refuses to rust. This is not a small trinket protected in a museum case. It is a monumental pillar 23 feet tall, forged in the 4th century, and it stands today without a single flake of corrosion. This defiance of nature is not a lucky accident. It is a deliberate, sophisticated feat of metallurgical engineering that we are only now beginning to fully understand. Modern analysis of the pillar's metal has uncovered its secret. The iron is of an astonishing purity, with an extremely low carbon content and a complete absence of sulfur and magnesium, the usual culprits that cause wrought iron to weaken and rust. But the real genius lies in what it does contain, a high percentage of phosphorus. This was no impurity. It was a crucial, intentional ingredient. The ancient Indian smiths who crafted this monument somehow knew that a high phosphorus content, combined with the local climate, would catalyze a remarkable reaction. A thin, invisible protective film, a passive layer called mesawite, forms on the surface of the metal. This film acts as a permanent, self-renewing barrier against moisture and oxygen, the very elements that cause corrosion. This process, known as passivation, was a technique Western industry would not master until the 20th century. The creation of the pillar itself is another staggering puzzle. Forging a single piece of iron of this size and purity would have been a monumental challenge. Think of the bloomery process we described earlier, a method that produces a small, spongy bloom of metal full of slag. To get 7 tons of usable iron, smiths would have needed to operate their furnaces simultaneously, forging countless individual blooms together into a single, seamless mass. The logistics of achieving this with such consistency and on such a scale suggests an organized, industrial-level operation, not a village blacksmith working with a simple forge. They were not just making a weapon or a tool. They were executing a grand, architectural vision with a material they had perfected. The pillar forces us to completely reconsider the technological capabilities of ancient India. This was not merely skilled craftsmanship, it was applied science. These metallurgists possessed a profound chemical understanding of their materials. They knew how specific elemental compositions would interact with the environment over centuries. They were thinking in timelines that stretch far beyond a single human lifetime. So what happened to this knowledge? Why did such an advanced understanding of ferrous metallurgy seemingly vanish from the historical record? The pillar stands alone, a perfect, rust-proof monument to a science that was lost, waiting for the modern world to finally catch up and decipher its silent, enduring message. Yet for all its silent strength, the iron pillar represents a technology that was ultimately static, a perfected form. But what if an ancient culture had mastered a dynamic, living metal, one that could be shaped into the deadliest blades the world had ever seen? The legendary swords of Damascus were not just weapons, they were a symphony of light and shadow, their surfaces flowing with a watery pattern that seemed to capture the very essence of a stormy sky. This mesmerizing appearance was merely the visible signature of a metal so advanced. Its internal structure remains a marvel to modern materials science. These blades possessed a sharpness and flexibility that bordered on the supernatural, capable of slicing through a silk scarf floating in the air or parrying another sword without a single notch. The secret was not in the forging technique alone, but in the very material they started with, a unique type of ultra-high carbon steel known as woots. This steel originated in India, where smiths developed a revolutionary crucible process. They placed small pieces of wrought iron and charcoal into a sealed clay pot, then heated it in a furnace for hours. In this sealed environment, the iron would not burn. Instead, it would absorb carbon from the charcoal, melting into a liquid steel ingot. This was a monumental leap. For the first time in history, humans were producing true liquid steel, a material of incredible purity and homogeneity. But the true genius of the Damascus smiths was in their transformative art. They would take these small woots ingots and heat them, then carefully hammer and fold them, not to mix impurities out as with ordinary wrought iron, but to manipulate the internal crystalline structure of the steel itself. The specific trace elements present in the original Indian ore, like vanadium, molybdenum, and chromium, were crucial. During the slow cooling and forging process, these elements caused the carbon in the steel to precipitate out, forming microscopic structures within the metal. When a finished blade was polished and etched with acid, these structures were revealed as the iconic wavy patterns. For centuries, the nature of these patterns was a complete mystery. It is only with the power of electron microscopes that we have finally been able to see what the naked eye never could. The surface of a Damascus blade is not merely etched. It is a landscape. The dark lines are made of ultra-hard cementite, a compound of iron and carbon. The lighter areas are a softer, more flexible steel. This combination gives the blade its legendary properties, a perfect marriage of hardness that holds an edge and toughness that prevents shattering. But the most astonishing discovery came when scientists looked even closer. They found that within this intricate matrix, the ancient smiths had somehow engineered carbon nanotubes and cementite nanowires. These are nanostructures, things measured in billionths of a meter. This means that through fire, hammer, and an almost intuitive grasp of material science, these medieval craftsmen were manipulating matter at a molecular level, a feat we associate with 21st century nanotechnology. This knowledge did not survive. By the 18th century, the recipe for true Damascus steel was lost. The source of the special Indian ore was forgotten, and the intricate, slow forging methods were abandoned for faster, industrial production. The blades that remain are not just artifacts, they are ghosts of a pinnacle, a peak of metallurgical art that was reached and then mysteriously abandoned. They stand as a permanent question. How did they know? How did they achieve such control over materials without any of the analytical tools we take for granted? The answer is written in steel, in a language of patterns we can now see but still struggle to speak. While the Damascus smiths worked their magic in the searing heat of their forges, a different kind of mystery was being hammered out in the cold north. Across Europe, warriors wielded swords marked with a name that would become a legend, Ulfberht. To own one was to hold a weapon of almost mythical power, a blade that could shear through the common iron weapons of the era with terrifying ease. These were not mere tools of war. They were technological signatures, each one boldly inlaid with the letters plus VLF, Bur plus T, a brand name that guaranteed superior performance centuries before the concept of branding even existed. But the true secret of an Ulfberht sword is not in its name, but in the metal itself, a material so pure it simply should not have existed in the Viking Age. When metallurgists analyze these blades, they find a form of high-carbon crucible steel. The level of impurities, the slag inclusions that typically weaken ancient iron, is almost zero. This is not the inconsistent, slag-ridden wrought iron typical of European forges of the time. This is a clean, homogeneous steel with a carbon content around 3 times that of its contemporaries, a recipe for a blade that is both harder and more flexible. Achieving this purity requires a technological leap that historians never credited to the Vikings. It demands a furnace capable of sustaining temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to liquefy iron and allow the slag, which has a lower melting point, to rise to the surface and be skimmed off. This is the fundamental process of crucible steelmaking, a method that would not become standard in Europe until the Industrial Revolution, nearly 800 years later. The Viking bloomery furnace, by stark contrast, could only reach about 2,200 degrees, producing that familiar spongy mass of iron and slag that required endless hammering. So how did the makers of the Ulfberht swords achieve the impossible? The answer may lie not in a secret furnace hidden in a fjord, but in a vast network of trade. The Volga trade routes connected the Norse world to the distant east, to Persia and Central Asia, where crucible steel production was already an ancient art. It is entirely possible that the Ulfberht makers were not smelting their own raw iron. Instead, they may have been importing ready-made ingots of ultra-pure Wootz steel from the east, then expertly forging them into blades tailored to the combat styles of the north. They were the master chefs of the metallurgical world, not growing the grain, but possessing the unique skill to bake it into the most magnificent bread. This theory transforms the Ulfberht from a product of isolated genius into an artifact of globalization, a tangible piece of a medieval world that was far more interconnected than we often imagine. But it also deepens the mystery. Who were these master smiths who controlled this exclusive supply of advanced metal? How did they maintain such consistent quality over 2 centuries? And why did the knowledge of how to work this material, like so many other advanced techniques, eventually vanish into the fog of history, leaving behind only the ghost of a name stamped on a blade that should not be? Buried within a stone that formed 500,000 years ago, a mechanical ghost waits to short-circuit our entire timeline. In 1961, while hunting for geodes near Olancha, California, 3 collectors cracked open what they thought was a simple lump of rock. Inside, instead of glittering crystals, they found something utterly incomprehensible. Embedded firmly within the ancient stone was an object that looked unmistakably like a 1920s-era spark plug. It had a hexagonal base, a threaded metal sleeve, and a central rod made of a magnetic metal, all surrounding a ceramic cylinder that was pure white porcelain. This was the Coso artifact, and its very existence is a direct assault on the accepted narrative of human progress. The geode itself was dated to an era when, according to every history book, our ancestors were barely beginning to use the most primitive stone tools. Homo sapiens did not even exist. This object should not be there. It is a diagram of the impossible. The mystery only deepens when we examine its metallurgy. Modern analysis using X-ray spectroscopy revealed the central metal rod is not simple iron. It is composed of a precise, manufactured alloy, primarily copper, but with significant additions of zinc and a trace of tin. This is not a naturally occurring combination. This is brass, and the specific ratio of these elements points directly to a sophisticated, industrial-age manufacturing process. The porcelain insulator is another piece of damning evidence. True, high-quality porcelain of that purity and durability was not achieved until the 19th century. It requires kilns that can maintain intensely controlled temperatures, far beyond what any ancient culture could have managed. The object is a perfect, cohesive whole, a manufactured item comprised of multiple advanced materials working in concert. The most common skeptical explanation is that it is simply a modern spark plug from a mining vehicle that somehow became encased in a concretion that merely looks like a geode. But this theory has its own problems. The rate of such concretion formation is hotly debated, and the object was found in a remote area, not an active industrial site. Even if it were a spark plug from the 1920s, its apparent age and the solidity of its encasement remain deeply puzzling. Whether a bizarre geological fluke or a genuine prehistoric anomaly, the Coso artifact forces a single, unsettling question. If it is modern, how did it achieve such a perfect state of fossilization in less than a century? And if it is ancient, what kind of civilization, entirely lost to our history, was building intricate machines with brass alloys and porcelain 500,000 years before our own industrial revolution? It stands as a stark reminder that our timeline might be missing entire chapters, and that the seeds of technology may have been planted in a soil we have not yet even thought to dig in. Buried deep beneath the sands of time, alongside the bones of a long-vanished giant, rests a small, silent object that dismantles the very foundations of our technological history. In 1974, construction workers digging a trench along the banks of the Mureș River in Aiud, Romania, uncovered a collection of ancient mastodon bones. Nestled among these remains 20 feet down was something that did not belong. It was a wedge-shaped object, heavily oxidized and seemingly ancient. Initially dismissed as an oddity, it was cleaned, revealing a lightweight, metallic sheen. Laboratory analysis would later deliver a verdict that defied all reason. The object was composed of an alloy, 89% aluminum, blended with 11 other elements including copper, zinc, and silicon. This is not just a curious metal. This is a sophisticated, engineered aluminum alloy, and it was found in a layer of earth dated to be 20,000 years old. This is the Aiud wedge, and its existence is a chronological impossibility. The science of metallurgy makes this fact brutally clear. Aluminum is the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust, but it is never found in its pure form. It is always locked tightly inside ore, bound to oxygen and other elements. To break those bonds and free the pure metal requires a tremendous input of electrical energy, a process called electrolysis that was not invented until the 19th century. The very idea of a 20,000-year-old aluminum alloy is akin to finding a stainless steel sword in a dinosaur's rib cage. The composition itself deepens the mystery. This is not raw, smelted aluminum. It is a specific, complex blend of metals, a recipe designed for strength and durability, the kind of alloy developed for high-stress industrial applications. Critics argue it must be a fragment of a modern excavator bucket or a piece of mining equipment that simply fell into the pit. but this explanation ignores two critical details found at the site. The object was encased in a thick, hard layer of oxide, a crust that experts stated would have required thousands of years to form under those conditions. More importantly, it was found nestled securely within a sealed stratum of sand and clay, right next to the massive bones of a mastodon, an animal that went extinct at the end of the last ice age. If it was a modern intrusion, how did it sink 20 feet down to rest beside a creature that has been dead for millennia? The Aiud wedge presents us with only two equally staggering possibilities. Either our understanding of human prehistory is catastrophically wrong, and an advanced industrial culture capable of complex metallurgy arose and vanished without a trace 20,000 years before the ancient Egyptians, or this object is evidence of a contact so foreign, so outside our paradigm that we lack the language to even describe it. It is a single, silent data point that refuses to be ignored, a piece of a diagram we cannot complete, forcing us to question not just when we learn to master metal, but if we were truly the first. Forged in a single moment of fire, then sealed away in a tomb of stone for 400 million years, the Kingoodie artifact presents a paradox that geology cannot solve. In 1844, in a quarry near Kingoodie, Scotland, workers splitting open a large block of Devonian sandstone made a discovery that would baffle scientists for centuries. Embedded deep within the solid rock, its handle mostly rotted away, was a perfectly formed iron hammerhead. The stone around it was ancient, dating to a time before dinosaurs, before mammals, even before the first creatures crawled onto land. This was not a recent intrusion. The hammer was part of the stone itself, a fossilized impossibility. Metallurgical analysis of the iron only deepens the mystery. The hammerhead is not made of the crude, slag-filled wrought iron typical of ancient or medieval tools. Its composition is remarkably pure, with a very low carbon content. This is the signature of a quality 19th century industrial forging process, not the handiwork of a primitive blacksmith. The metal is consistent, clean, and shows evidence of having been worked with a precision that simply did not exist in any era that could logically be associated with a 400-million-year-old rock. The conundrum is absolute. If the hammer is a recent tool, how did it become completely encased within a solid, ancient geological formation, a process that would normally take millions of years? If the hammer is as old as the stone that holds it, then who could have made it? What civilization existed on Earth 400 million years ago that had the knowledge to smelt iron and forge it into sophisticated tools? This single object, known as the Kingoodie Hammer, has become a classic example of what researchers call an out-of-place artifact, or OOP art. It is a physical diagram that directly contradicts the established timeline of life and human technological development. It forces us to confront two equally radical possibilities. Either our understanding of geology and the rates at which rock formations solidify is fundamentally flawed, allowing for freak occurrences where objects can become encased in stone over dramatically shorter periods, or our history is wrong in a far more profound way. These artifacts suggest the ghost of a cycle, a previous iteration of intelligent life on Earth that rose to an industrial capability, only to be utterly erased by deep time, leaving behind nothing but these enigmatic, metallic fossils as clues to their existence. The hammer is not alone. It is one piece of a scattered global puzzle, each fragment whispering the same unsettling question: how many times has the clock been reset? This story of a hammer sealed in ancient stone is not a singular event. Across the Atlantic, another tool was waiting to tell a very similar, and perhaps even more perplexing, tale. In 1936, on a rocky outcrop near London, Texas, a couple walking along the banks of the Red Creek made a discovery that would become legendary. They noticed a curious piece of wood protruding from a loose rock. When they cracked the nodule open, they found an ordinary-looking hammerhead embedded within it, its handle seamlessly merging with the stone that had encased it. This is the London hammer, and its simple appearance belies a deeply complex scientific nightmare. The rock itself was identified as Cretaceous limestone, a formation that dates back well over 100 million years to an age when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. The wooden handle had undergone a process called coalification, where organic material slowly transforms towards coal under immense pressure and over vast stretches of time. This was not a recent object that had fallen into a crack. The hammer was an intrinsic part of the stone, suggesting it had been there for a geological eternity. Yet, the hammer itself tells a completely different story. Modern metallurgical analysis of the iron head reveals a metal of astonishing purity. It contains no slag inclusions, the gritty impurities that are the unmistakable fingerprint of all ancient and medieval ironworking. This is clean, well-forged iron. The chemical composition points to a quality of smelting and forging that was simply not achieved until the industrial era of the 19th century. So we are presented with an object that, by every measure of the material it is made from, is only a few hundred years old, found inside a rock that is 100 million years old. Both facts cannot be true within our current understanding of the world. This is the core of the paradox. Skeptics have proposed that the hammer is indeed a 19th century miner's tool, and that the limestone nodule is not a solid ancient rock but a concretion, a hard mineral shell that can form relatively quickly around an object, especially in mineral-rich water. But this explanation struggles with the condition of the wooden handle. The process of coalification is not a fast one. It is not something that happens to a piece of wood over a mere century. It requires the specific conditions of pressure and time that are measured in millions of years. So if the hammer is modern, how did its handle become partially fossilized? And if the rock is ancient, how did a modern hammer get inside it? The London hammer, like its Scottish cousin, forces us to confront a series of deeply uncomfortable questions about our own history. Do these objects represent glimpses of a lost human civilization, one that achieved an industrial capability and was then utterly wiped from the record, leaving only its tools behind as cryptic evidence? Or do they point to a fundamental flaw in our geological and dating methods, suggesting that the processes which form rocks and fossilize materials can sometimes operate on a timeline we do not yet comprehend? Each possibility is revolutionary. Each one demands that we reconsider the very foundation of our story. These hammers are not mere curiosities. They are physical arguments, silent protests against a timeline that suddenly seems far too small to contain them. Carved from a single piece of sycamore wood, the artifact known as the Saqqara Bird feels unsettlingly familiar in your hand. Discovered in 1898 during the excavation of a tomb near Saqqara, Egypt, this small model is officially classified as a ceremonial object, perhaps a bird-shaped toy or a weather vane. But its design tells a radically different story. Dated to roughly 200 years before the Common Era, this object does not look like any bird from nature. Its wings are perfectly straight, aerodynamically angled, and rectangular in shape, unlike the curved, tapered wings of a bird in flight. The tail is what truly sets it apart. It is vertical and flat, ending in a squared-off rudder, a feature no bird possesses but every modern airplane requires for stability. This is not a carving of a creature. It is a diagram of a machine. The principles of flight it embodies are not abstract concepts. They are specific, technical details that humanity would not rediscover for nearly 2,000 years. The wing shape, now called an airfoil, is designed to generate lift. Air moving over the curved top surface of the wing must travel faster than the air moving beneath it, creating a difference in pressure that literally sucks the wing upward. This is the fundamental principle that allows airplanes to fly, a concept formally described by Daniel Bernoulli in the 18th century. The vertical tail fin is equally sophisticated. It acts as a stabilizer, preventing the aircraft from spinning out of control along its vertical axis, a problem every early aviation pioneer struggled with. The ancient artisan who carved this object did not simply guess these forms. They encoded a working understanding of aerodynamics into wood. This presents a profound historical problem. The ancient Egyptians were master engineers, but their brilliance was rooted in monumental, static architecture and land-based transportation. We have no hieroglyphs describing theories of flight, no tomb paintings depicting gliders, and no evidence of any larger prototypes. The Saqqara Bird exists in a complete technological vacuum. It is a single, silent data point suggesting a line of inquiry that, according to our records, was never pursued. So what was it? Was it a child's toy based on a design that was, for its time, commonplace, that seems wildly improbable? Was it the model for a ceremonial craft meant to carry a pharaoh's soul to the heavens, a literal vehicle for ascension? This is a poetic idea, but it still implies a conceptual leap into applied physics that we never knew they made. Or does it point to something else entirely, a lost thread of experimentation, perhaps a rudimentary glider technology that was attempted, failed, and was abandoned, leaving behind only this wooden blueprint as a cryptic clue? The true mystery of the Saqqara Bird is not its existence, but the knowledge it represents. Someone, long before the Wright brothers, looked at the sky and understood that flight was not magic, but a puzzle of physics waiting to be solved. They understood lift, they understood stability, they carved that understanding into a piece of wood, a three-dimensional diagram of an idea centuries ahead of its time. It forces us to wonder what other ideas, what other glimpses of future science were lost because they were written in materials less durable than stone. Yet another wooden artifact suggests a forgotten science of flight, but our next diagram charts a course across the entire globe, revealing coastlines that no European should have known. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis compiled a world map of such stunning accuracy that it defies the entire history of exploration. His map, painted on gazelle skin, shows the western coasts of Africa and Europe, the eastern shores of South America, and most astonishingly, the northern coastline of Antarctica. This alone is a profound mystery, as the frozen continent would not be officially discovered for another 300 years, but the real shock is in the details. The map does not show Antarctica as a land of ice. It depicts the Queen Maud Land region with its precise, ice-free topography, a landscape that has been buried under a mile-thick glacial cap for at least 6,000 years. This is not a lucky guess or a fanciful illustration. The contours of the coast match modern seismic surveys of the bedrock beneath the ice with an accuracy that is deeply unsettling. How could a 16th century cartographer have mapped a continent he could not see, depicting a coastline that had been invisible for millennia? The map's technical sophistication provides a clue. Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the parchment, stating that his work was compiled from many older source maps, including some that dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. This suggests he was not the original surveyor, but the last inheritor of a far more ancient geographical tradition. The precision of the longitudes on the map is particularly telling. Accurately calculating longitude requires knowing the exact time difference between your location and a fixed point, like your home port. This was the single greatest navigational problem of the age, one that would not be solved until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. To map something as vast as a continent with such accuracy implies the original cartographers possessed not only advanced mathematics, like spherical trigonometry, but also incredibly precise timekeeping instruments. What kind of tools could they have used? Metallurgy provides a possible, though speculative, answer. The gears of the Antikythera Mechanism prove the ancient Greeks had the capacity for precise metalworking. Could a similar but far more advanced mechanical device have been used for navigation? A complex clockwork mechanism made of corrosion-resistant bronze, capable of keeping accurate time at sea, would explain the mathematical precision locked within the map's contours. This theory points to a lost age of exploration, a seafaring civilization with the technology to circumnavigate the globe and map it with scientific rigor long before the rise of any known empire. Their knowledge, fragmented and copied onto parchment over centuries, eventually found its way into the hands of a Turkish admiral. The Piri Reis Map is therefore more than just a chart. It is a palimpsest, a layered document where the ghost of a much older world bleeds through the ink of a more recent one. It forces us to ask who these master mariners really were. Were they a culture now lost to history, their ships and instruments dissolved by time? Or does this map preserve the last remaining evidence of a global knowledge that was once common, only to be fragmented and forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered on a piece of stretched animal skin? A forgotten clay jar, unearthed from the ruins of a Parthian village outside Baghdad, holds a secret that flickers with the ghost of modern power. It appears simple, almost primitive, a 13-centimeter tall vase of yellowish clay. But inside, the arrangement of metals reveals a stunning sophistication. A carefully rolled copper sheet forms a cylinder held in place by asphalt. Within this copper tube sits a single iron rod, isolated from the copper by another asphalt plug at the top. This is not a random collection of items. This is a circuit. When filled with an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, a chemical reaction occurs. The acid attacks the dissimilar metals, causing electrons to flow from the iron rod to the copper cylinder through the liquid, generating a small but measurable electric current, just over 1 volt. It is, for all intents and purposes, a battery. The metallurgy confirms this was no accident. The choice of copper and iron was deliberate, two metals with the right electrochemical potential to create a voltage difference. The asphalt stoppers were not just seals, they were insulators, preventing the charge from shorting out and ensuring the current could only flow through an external connection. This is a purpose-built electrochemical cell, a device whose basic blueprint would not be reinvented until Alessandro Volta created his voltaic pile in the year 1800. That is a gap of nearly 2 millennia. So what were the Parthians, a culture we associate with horseback warfare and desert trade routes, doing with electricity? The complete absence of any historical context is deafening. We have no writings, no diagrams, no legends that speak of a power that could tingle the skin or produce a faint spark. If these jars were indeed batteries, what were they used to power? The most compelling theory suggests they were used for electroplating, to deposit a thin layer of gold or silver onto other metal objects, a practice known to have existed in the region. A dozen of these batteries, connected in series, could have produced enough voltage to accomplish this, creating a shimmering, precious finish through a process that would have seemed like pure magic. Yet, even this practical explanation feels inadequate. It implies a quiet, working knowledge of a fundamental force of the universe, a force that the rest of humanity would spend the next 2,000 years completely oblivious to. The Baghdad Battery stands as a quiet, humming paradox. It represents a path not taken, a branch of technology that was discovered, perhaps even utilized in a limited way, and then inexplicably abandoned. It is a single, silent wire leading back to a past that possessed a spark of genius we are only now learning to see. Scattered across a high desert plateau in Peru, a vast gallery of art exists that can only be seen from the heavens. These are the Nazca Lines, enormous geoglyphs carved into the rocky earth between 500 and 2,000 years ago. From the ground, they appear as little more than shallow grooves in the soil, but from the air, they transform into a breathtaking array of perfectly straight lines, massive geometric shapes, and colossal figures of animals and plants stretching for miles. Their sheer scale and precision present an engineering puzzle that is every bit as confounding as any metallurgical mystery. How could a culture without the wheel, without written language, and without any known surveying instruments create diagrams of such staggering accuracy and size? The creation of these lines required a level of planning and mathematical knowledge that, according to conventional history, should not have existed in ancient South America. The precision is the true shock. Some of the straight lines run for over 30 miles across the desert floor, deviating by less than a few feet over their entire length. To achieve this without modern tools like theodolites or GPS requires an understanding of geometry that is frankly astonishing. The builders would have needed a consistent unit of measurement, a way to establish perfectly straight sight lines over undulating terrain, and a method for scaling up a small design to a monumental size without a single error. This isn't free-hand drawing in the sand. This is civil engineering on a gigantic scale. The tools themselves are a missing piece of the puzzle. While the lines are not made of metal, their flawless execution implies the possible use of sophisticated instruments that have not survived. Could the Nazca people have developed advanced surveying tools made from wood and metal? Perhaps they used polished metal plates as mirrors for signaling across vast distances to maintain alignment, or constructed simple yet effective devices for triangulating positions and plotting angles. Their knowledge of astronomy is evident in many of the designs, which align with celestial events like solstices. This suggests they may have used the stars themselves as a fixed reference grid, mapping the heavens onto the earth with a confidence that rivals the builders of Stonehenge. The purpose of these immense drawings remains one of archaeology's greatest enigmas. Were they ritual pathways, astronomical calendars, or offerings to gods they believed watched from above? Whatever their intention, their existence speaks of a society capable of incredible organized effort and technical planning. They could visualize a complex design, communicate it across generations of workers, and execute it with mathematical certainty across a landscape so vast the artists could never see their own finished work. The Nazca Lines are a different kind of diagram, one written not on parchment but on the planet itself. They are a testament to a human mind that could conceive of precision on a scale that the modern world would only achieve with machines. Deep within the shadows of museum collections, objects of pure crystal stare out with an unnerving perfection. The crystal skulls, most famously the Mitchell-Hedges skull, are often dismissed as 19th-century hoaxes, clever fables carved for a lucrative antiquities market. But this easy explanation begins to crack under the intense glare of modern scientific scrutiny. The most perplexing of these artifacts are not made from soft, easily worked stone. They are carved from a single block of the hardest materials on Earth, solid quartz crystal. Shaping this material is a monumental challenge even with today's technology. Quartz ranks a 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. To put that in perspective, that means it can only be scratched by materials of equal or greater hardness, like topaz, sapphire, or diamond. In the pre-Columbian era, this would have presented an insurmountable problem. the available tools made of copper, bronze, or even stone are all drastically softer than quartz. Attempting to carve it with these metals would be like trying to shape a diamond with a piece of chalk. It simply would not work. The tool would wear away long before the crystal did. The creation of such an object would require tools tipped with diamonds or other equally hard gemstones, and a method for applying incredible, sustained pressure with microscopic precision. Yet, when we examine the finest skulls under high-powered microscopes, we find no evidence of these tools. There are no telltale scratch marks, no gouges from a crude chisel, no signs of the abrasive sand that would have been used in a lengthy grinding process. The surfaces are impossibly smooth, the features flawlessly symmetrical. The jawbone of the Mitchell-Hedges skull, carved from the same single piece of crystal, fits so perfectly with the cranium that it moves on tiny, invisible hinges. This is a feat of microengineering. Modern analysis suggests that to achieve this level of precision, the carvers would have needed to work without any margin for error, removing tiny flakes of crystal a fraction of a millimeter at a time for years, perhaps even decades. They would have needed to see what they were doing with the clarity of a powerful microscope, guiding their tools with a steadiness that defies human hands. Some researchers have even proposed that only advanced technology, like ultrasonic drills or focused beams of energy, could explain the smooth, laser-like precision of the cuts. This is where the mystery transforms from a question of craftsmanship to a diagram of the impossible. If these skulls are modern fakes who in the 1800s possessed this technology, and if they are genuinely ancient, what forgotten civilization mastered the secrets of crystal and light, leaving behind only these haunting, silent faces as evidence of their genius? The skulls do not offer answers. They only reflect our own questions, staring back at us across the centuries with a knowing, impossible grin. Etched into the stone walls of a dark temple crypt in Dendera, Egypt, a diagram flickers with an anachronistic glow. This 2,000-year-old relief, dedicated to the goddess Hathor, shows a scene that has divided historians and electrified alternative history enthusiasts. Within a large, elongated vessel reminiscent of a modern glass bulb, a snake extends along its center, held taut by a pair of supporting arms. The entire assembly is connected by a cable to a box upon which an Egyptian deity kneels. To the modern eye, the resemblance is jarringly immediate. This is the unmistakable shape of a light bulb, complete with its filament and electrical base. The mainstream archaeological interpretation is that this is a symbolic representation, a mythological scene showing a lotus flower birthing a snake, a metaphor for creation and cosmic power. But the visual parallels are so precise, so mechanically detailed, that the symbolic explanation feels, to many, like an inadequate fit. The snake does not coil naturally. It is stretched straight, held in perfect tension, exactly as a filament would be within an evacuated glass tube. The arms that hold it are not decorative, they look like functional supports. The base of the bulb connects to a distinct, separate object that looks less like a religious altar and more like a power source or a battery, a jed pillar connected by a cable to the bulb itself. If this is merely a symbol, why does it so meticulously diagram the components of an electrical device? If it is a literal depiction of a technology, the implications are earth-shattering. It suggests the ancient Egyptians, or a culture that influenced them, possessed not just a theoretical spark of electrical knowledge, but a practical application for it. Creating a working light bulb requires a cascade of advanced understandings. First, the knowledge of electrical current itself and how to generate it consistently, perhaps with devices like the Baghdad Battery. Second, a mastery of glassworking to form a sealed, hollow bulb, a technique that requires controlled, high-temperature furnaces. And third, the understanding that a vacuum or an inert gas inside that bulb is necessary to prevent the filament from instantly oxidizing and burning away. This is not primitive guesswork. This is a sophisticated chain of engineering and material science. The Dendera relief does not exist in a complete vacuum. Ancient texts from various cultures speak of perpetual lights that burned in tombs and underground chambers, descriptions that have long been dismissed as legend. But what if they were not? What if this carving is the technical manual, the wiring diagram for those legendary eternal flames? It stands as a silent, stone argument against the linear progression of technology, a permanent question mark on the wall of a forgotten crypt, asking us if we are truly the first to have brought light from the darkness. A single silver coin, smaller than a thumbnail, carries a weight that can tilt the axis of history. Discovered in 1957 at a Native American settlement in Maine, this tiny artifact is officially known as the Maine Penny. It is a Norse silver coin, minted between 1065 and 1080 during the height of the Viking Age, and it was found buried in a shell midden on the coast of North America, a continent that, according to every standard history book, remained completely unknown to Europe for another 400 years. This is not a theory or a legend. It is a physical object, a piece of metal with a story that fundamentally contradicts the narrative we have all been taught. The coin itself is unremarkable in its origin. Its metallurgy is classic Norse, a silver alloy consistent with coins minted in Norway under King Olaf Kyrre. But its location is everything. It was found not as a lone curiosity, but within the context of a confirmed prehistoric Native American site, dated to the 1200s. This means the coin was not dropped by a modern collector. It was in use, or at least in possession, by the indigenous people of that region centuries before any European expedition could have possibly brought it there. How did it get there? The most logical yet revolutionary explanation is that it arrived the same way the Norse did, by boat. We know from the sagas and archaeological sites like Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland that the Vikings did indeed reach the northeastern shores of Canada around the year 1000. The Maine Penny suggests their exploration or their trade did not stop there. A Norse coin in Maine implies a journey of hundreds of miles further down the coast, and more importantly, it implies contact. This small piece of silver is evidence of a meeting, a moment of exchange between a Norse explorer and a Wabanaki tribesperson. Perhaps it was traded for furs or food. Perhaps it was given as a gift or carried as a curiosity. But that single transaction, that brief, forgotten handoff, rewrites entire chapters of human history. It means the two halves of the world were connected, however tenuously, centuries before Columbus. The coin is a data point, a metallic fingerprint left behind from a journey history chose to forget. It forces us to ask what else was traded, what knowledge or ideas might have passed between these cultures long before we thought it was possible. This one coin proves that our map of the past is still incomplete, and that the most profound discoveries are sometimes waiting, silent and small, in the most unexpected places. Buried in the soil of the Toluca Valley, a face stares out from a past that should not be its own. In 1933, archaeologists excavating a burial site at Calixtlahuaca, Mexico, unearthed a small terracotta head from a sealed layer beneath a pyramid. The artifact itself is simple, a hollow figurine fragment, but its features are anything but ordinary. This is not the stylized visage of an Aztec god or an Olmec warrior. The man it depicts has a full beard and a distinctly Roman hairstyle, complete with the characteristic band known as a fillet. It is a face that would look perfectly at home on a statue in the Roman Forum. and it was found in a stratum carbon dated to around 200 years after the Common Era began, a time when, according to all history books, the continents of Europe and America were entirely isolated from one another. This is the Tecaxic-Calixtlahuaca Head, and its silent, stoic expression challenges the very idea of a disconnected ancient world. The mystery is not one of metallurgy, but of cultural fingerprinting. The artistic style is the anomaly. Pre-Columbian art from this region and era follows its own specific, well-documented conventions, with particular ways of shaping eyes, mouths, and headdresses. This head follows none of them. Its technique, from the rendering of the facial hair to the method of applying the clay, aligns far more closely with workshop traditions from the Roman Empire than with anything from Mesoamerica. For this object to be authentic, it means that an artistic model, a cultural idea, somehow crossed an ocean that was thought to be impassable centuries before the Vikings. How did a Roman artistic convention find its way into a Mexican burial mound? The head implies a journey, a physical object carried by a person, or perhaps the memory of a face seen by a traveler, reproduced by a local artisan who had never seen anything like it before. It is a diagram of human contact, a single data point suggesting a thread of connection that our historical maps refuse to draw. Skeptics have argued it must be a colonial-era intrusion, a toy lost by a Spanish child that somehow worked its way deep into an ancient archaeological layer. But the context of its discovery makes this difficult to accept. It was found by professional archaeologists beneath an intact pyramid foundation, in a sealed deposit that had not been disturbed for centuries. The idea of a modern object filtering down through meters of solid earth and rock to settle into a precise, ancient stratum defies basic geology. If it is genuine, the implications are profound. It suggests that the Roman world, with its vast trading networks that stretched from Britain to India, may have had tentacles that reached even further, perhaps through a lost ship blown off course, or a deliberate expedition that never returned home to tell the tale. This one small head of baked clay asks us a simple, staggering question. If one person made the journey, how many others did we simply never find? Yet another voice from the deep past speaks in a language of spirals and stone. In the remote Bayan Karaula Mountains on the border between China and Tibet, a discovery was made in 1938 that would fuel speculation for decades. A series of caves held not only ancient skeletons of a small, unusual people, but also hundreds of stone discs, each about a foot across with a perfect hole in the center. These are the Dropa Stones, and at first glance they appear to be simple Neolithic artifacts, perhaps ritual objects or primitive ornaments, but a closer look reveals something that should not be there. Each disc is carved with a fine, continuous spiral groove, and within that groove, etched in a script so tiny it is barely visible to the naked eye, are rows of unknown hieroglyphic characters. The very existence of this microscopic writing presents a profound puzzle for the timeline of human technology. To inscribe such precise, minuscule markings onto a hard stone surface requires tools of immense hardness and fine tips. Think of the challenge. A Neolithic artisan working with tools of flint or bone would have no way to create such a consistent, deep, and clean groove, let alone fill it with a uniform written script. This kind of precision work implies the use of a rotary tool, a kind of ancient lathe, or perhaps even a drill bit made of a material harder than the stone itself, like diamond. We have no evidence of such advanced machining tools from 12,000 years ago. The content of the alleged translations pushes the mystery even further into the realm of the incredible. Various claims, all highly controversial and widely disputed by mainstream scholars, suggest the hieroglyphs tell a story of a spacecraft that crashed in the mountains, and of its occupants, the Dropa people, who were unable to repair their vessel and were stranded on Earth. This narrative has been thoroughly debunked by most experts, who point to a lack of verifiable evidence and the fact that the original discs have been lost to history, leaving behind only stories and photographs. But to dismiss the entire affair, we must first answer the initial material question. If they are a hoax, who created them and why with such convincing Neolithic aging? And if they are genuine artifacts, what forgotten culture possessed the means to engrave stone with the precision of a modern machine shop? The Dropa Stones, whether an elaborate modern fabrication or a genuine prehistoric anomaly, represent the outer boundary of archaeological speculation. They challenge us not necessarily to believe in ancient astronauts, but to continually question the limits of what we believe was possible. They are a permanent reminder that some diagrams from the past are so strange, so out of place, that they force us to choose between rethinking history or dismissing the artifact entirely. Etched into the dark, volcanic andesite of the Ica River region, a gallery of impossible knowledge stares back at us. Discovered in a cave in the 1960s, the Ica Stones number in the thousands, each one carved with scenes that shatter our understanding of pre-Columbian Peru. The images are not the familiar geometric patterns or stylized gods of the local cultures. They depict men using telescopes to gaze at the stars, performing complex surgical procedures like heart transplants and cesarean sections, and living side by side with creatures that we recognize instantly as dinosaurs, rendered with an anatomical accuracy that would require a modern paleontological textbook. The controversy surrounding these stones is a battlefield between outright fraud and a mystery that refuses to die. The most common explanation is that they are an elaborate modern hoax carved by local farmers to sell to tourists. This is supported by the fact that the initial discoverer later admitted to faking many of them, yet this admission does not completely close the case. The sheer volume of stones, the consistency of the artistic style across so many pieces, and the depth and precision of the carvings themselves present a lingering puzzle. Andesite is an incredibly hard stone, difficult to work with even modern steel tools. To carve such intricate, deep, and clean lines would require not just metal chisels, but hardened ones, tools of a quality that should not have existed in the region before the Spanish arrival. The content of the carvings is the true anomaly. How would a 20th century Peruvian farmer know the precise skeletal structure of a stegosaurus, with its iconic back plates and spiked tail, details only confirmed by science decades after the stones were allegedly found? The astronomical maps show constellations with a precision that suggests not just observation, but a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. The medical scenes are not crude drawings of surgery. They are detailed diagrams showing steps and instruments with a clinical accuracy that feels like it was copied from an operating manual. This forces a difficult choice. Either a single hoaxer or a small group possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of paleontology, advanced medicine, and astronomy, and applied it with masterful artistic skill to create thousands of convincing forgeries for a tiny monetary return, or we are looking at a handful of genuine artifacts. Perhaps a few real stones, carved by a forgotten culture with inexplicable insight, were discovered, inspiring a cottage industry of copies that eventually drowned out the original signal with noise. The Ica Stones, whether ancient or modern, are a powerful testament to an idea, a diagram of a past where humans walked with dinosaurs and mastered the heavens, a story so compelling that someone felt the need to carve it in stone, forever challenging us to separate the hoax from the history. Carved into the soft sandstone walls of a secluded valley north of Sydney, a message in stone whispers of an impossible journey. The Gosford Glyphs present a tableau of familiar figures, a collection of Egyptian hieroglyphs depicting owls, sacred jars, and even the name of a well-known pharaoh, all etched into the Australian bush. If authentic, these carvings would be nothing short of revolutionary. A direct line drawn across 12,000 kilometers of ocean, connecting the land of the pharaohs to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia millennia before Captain Cook's arrival. But the mystery is not just in the images themselves, it is in the very act of their creation. The lines are deep, clean, and precise, carved with a confident hand. This kind of work on hard sandstone requires more than a sharp piece of flint or a hardened bone. It demands metal tools, specifically chisels made of copper or bronze, to achieve such clarity and depth. At the time these glyphs are claimed to have been made, around 4,500 years ago, the indigenous people of Australia were master craftsmen in stone and wood, but they did not practice metallurgy. They had no smelting furnaces, no forges, and no metal tools. So who made these marks and with what? The implications of authenticity are staggering. It would mean that ancient Egyptian mariners possessed seaworthy vessels capable of surviving a voyage across the Indian Ocean. It would suggest they had the navigational skill to find this specific coastline, and then the motive to leave behind a permanent, monumental record of their visit. This would not be a lone ship blown off course. It would be a deliberate expedition, an intentional act of contact that rewrites the entire story of human exploration, turning it from a series of isolated events into a potential web of ancient global connections. Mainstream archaeologists, however, point to the glyphs themselves as proof of a modern hoax. They note that the hieroglyphs are a jumbled mix of styles from different Egyptian eras, some carved upside down or backwards, mistakes no literate Egyptian scribe would ever make. The story they supposedly tell of explorers dying in a foreign land is compelling but filled with anachronisms. The most likely explanation is that they were carved in the 20th century, perhaps by returning Australian soldiers who had been stationed in Egypt during the World Wars, using their memories and books as a guide. Yet, even with this logical dismissal, a sliver of doubt remains. The local Aboriginal community has oral histories that speak of ancient, fair-skinned visitors arriving from across the sea, stories that predate European colonization by generations. The glyphs, whether a modern prank or a genuine ancient message, have become a part of this local lore, a physical anchor for a legend. They force us to confront a difficult question. Are we dismissing them too easily because they challenge a historical paradigm we are comfortable with, or are we clinging to a romantic idea because the alternative is simply too mundane? The Gosford Glyphs stand as a beautiful, frustrating enigma, a diagram of a past that might have been carved in stone for us to decipher. A ship's bell carries a sound meant to travel, but this one made a journey that defies all maps. In the early 19th century, a missionary in New Zealand came across a most peculiar object. It was a metal bell unearthed by indigenous Maori people who were clearing land. To the untrained eye, it might have been just another curious trinket from a shipwreck, but this was no ordinary ship's bell. Its surface was inscribed with a script that was completely foreign to the South Pacific, a flowing, elegant writing that would later be identified as ancient Tamil, a language from the southern tip of India. This single artifact, found on the other side of the world, presents a diagram of a voyage that should not have been possible. The bell itself is a product of classic medieval Indian metallurgy. It is cast from a high-quality bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, with a specific composition and manufacturing technique consistent with bells produced in the Tamil region between the 14th and 16th centuries. This was not a crude imitation. It was the real thing, forged in the fires of an Indian workshop, yet it was discovered in New Zealand, a land that, according to all conventional history, remained isolated from the Old World until the arrival of European explorers centuries later. The distance between these 2 points is not just vast, it is an entire ocean of historical impossibility. The accepted narrative tells us that medieval Indian ships were coastal vessels, hugging the shoreline of the Indian Ocean, not the deep sea, blue water caravels capable of surviving the monstrous swells of the open Pacific. So how did this bell cross 12,000 kilometers of open ocean? Its presence whispers of a forgotten chapter of human ambition, of Tamil merchants or explorers whose names are lost to history, but whose legacy is this single, resonant object. Perhaps a trading ship, blown far off its intended course by a typhoon, managed to survive a journey of months, eventually making landfall in Polynesia. Or perhaps this was not an accident at all, but evidence of a deliberate, sustained effort of exploration, a maritime network that connected cultures we still consider separate. The bell is not an isolated find. It fits into a broader, puzzling pattern of linguistic and biological clues, like the presence of the sweet potato, a plant native to the Americas, found across Polynesia long before European contact. This suggests the Pacific was not a barrier, but a highway, navigated by peoples whose seafaring skills we have profoundly underestimated. The Tamil bell diagrams a world that was far more interconnected than our history books dare to admit. It forces us to reconsider the technological prowess of ancient mariners. What kind of ships did they sail? What navigational secrets did they possess, reading the stars, the waves, and the flight of birds to guide them across the trackless deep? This small, unassuming bell is a monument to human courage and curiosity, a ringing proof that the urge to explore, to trade, and to connect is a fundamental part of our story, one that we are only just beginning to hear. Scattered across the river deltas and jungle foothills of Costa Rica, a landscape of perfect geometry defies the chaos of nature. The stone spheres of Costa Rica are not just rocks. They are monuments to an obsession with precision, dating back to at least 600 years after the Common Era began. Ranging from the size of a melon to colossal orbs over 2 meters in diameter and weighing 16 tons, these spheres are so perfectly shaped that modern engineers struggle to explain their creation with the tools of that era. Their surfaces are unnervingly smooth, their curves mathematically true. This is not the work of artisans chipping away with simple hammers. This is the product of a sophisticated, systematic process, a diagram of a lost engineering principle. The stone itself, a hard granodiorite, is incredibly difficult to work. Shaping it into a crude ball would be a challenge, but achieving a near-perfect sphere is an entirely different feat. It implies a deep understanding of geometry and a method for constantly checking measurements in 3 dimensions. How do you ensure every point on the surface is equidistant from the center without advanced mathematics and precision instruments? The most logical explanation points to the use of metal. While the spheres are stone, their creation almost certainly required metal tools for the fine shaping and, more importantly, metal templates and measuring devices to verify their symmetry. Yet no such metal tools, no calipers, no compasses have ever been found at the sites. This absence is deafening. It suggests that either these advanced tools were so valuable they were never discarded, or that the knowledge behind their making was so specialized it vanished without a trace. The spheres stand as silent, massive questions. Were they astronomical markers, status symbols, or part of a grand, forgotten cosmic map? Their true purpose is lost, but their perfection remains, a lasting echo of a people who looked at a block of stone and saw a perfect sphere hidden within, waiting to be set free. But the most profound secrets are not always written in stone or forged in metal. Some are inscribed on vellum, in a language that has defied every attempt at translation for over a century. The Voynich Manuscript is a book that should not exist, a 240-page puzzle bound in the early 15th century, filled with illustrations of a world we cannot recognize and text we cannot read. The materials are mundane enough, carbon-dated vellum and iron gall ink typical of the era, but the content is a breathtaking anomaly. Its pages overflow with drawings of plants that bear no resemblance to any known species on Earth, their roots and leaves arranged in impossible configurations. There are intricate astronomical charts showing celestial bodies and constellations that do not match our night sky, and biological diagrams depicting tiny, nude women bathing in a system of interconnected tubes and vessels that suggest an advanced, almost microscopic understanding of bodily functions. This is not a work of fantasy. The consistency of the script, the careful organization of the sections, and the sheer volume of text all point to a work of deliberate, systematic knowledge. Someone was documenting something real, but something entirely outside our historical understanding. The text itself, written in a unique, flowing script of unknown characters, has resisted the efforts of the world's best cryptographers and linguists, including code breakers from both world wars. Statistical analysis shows it has the complex patterns of a genuine language, not random gibberish, yet it matches no known linguistic family on Earth. This suggests one of two equally staggering possibilities. Either it is an incredibly sophisticated cipher, protecting secrets so valuable that their code remains unbroken 600 years later, or it is the sole surviving artifact of a completely lost culture, a civilization that developed its own advanced scientific knowledge and written language before vanishing without a trace. The Voynich Manuscript is a diagram of a forgotten reality, a glimpse into a branch of human knowledge that grew in a direction we can no longer follow. It sits in a university library, a quiet, paper-bound universe of unanswered questions, reminding us that some of history's greatest mysteries are not locked away in tombs, but sitting on a shelf, waiting for the one key that will make sense of it all. Carved with a clarity that seems to defy the very stone it is made from, the genetic disc presents a biological blueprint from a time before history. Discovered in Colombia, this artifact is fashioned from lyddite, an incredibly hard stone similar to granite. Its surface is not decorated with simple patterns or mythological beasts, but with a series of precise, clinical diagrams that depict the miracle of human creation. One panel shows a sperm cell, its flagellum whipping with motion frozen in stone, swimming toward a waiting egg. Another illustrates a fertilized ovum in its earliest stages of cell division, a process called mitosis, captured with an accuracy that would require a powerful microscope to observe. This is not symbolic art. This is anatomical illustration, a scientific record of processes that would remain invisible to the human eye for thousands of years. The level of detail is so advanced, so specific, that it feels less like an ancient relic and more like a page torn from a modern biology textbook and sent back through time. The method of its creation is a puzzle equal to its content. Lyddite is an extremely dense and durable material, ranking high on the hardness scale. To carve such fine, shallow, and precise lines into its surface without fracturing the stone would require tools tipped with a material even harder, like diamond or a sophisticated industrial alloy. The artisans would have needed to see what they were carving, implying the use of some form of lens-based magnification to guide their hands. This combination of precise biological knowledge and advanced machining technology simply should not exist together in the prehistoric era. The disc forces a deeply unsettling question. How could a culture that, by all accounts, should have been using simple stone tools possess such a profound understanding of cellular biology, a science that did not formally emerge until the invention of the compound microscope in the 17th century? The most logical explanations within our current historical framework all fall short. It is unlikely to be a hoax, as the disc was found in a genuine prehistoric context, and the knowledge it displays was not common until centuries after its alleged discovery. This leaves two radical possibilities. Either a now vanished high civilization, possessing advanced scientific knowledge, arose and was lost without leaving any other clear evidence, or this intricate diagram was created with the guidance of an outside influence, a transfer of information that came from a source we have not yet begun to consider. The genetic disc does not offer answers. Instead, it presents a single, silent data point, a circular argument in stone that suggests our story of discovery is missing its most important chapters. Written on ancient clay tablets in the cradle of civilization, a single document presents a history that reads more like mythology. The Sumerian king list is not a simple record of names and dates. It is a chronological bombshell, a detailed account of monarchs who ruled for periods that defy all biological possibility. The text meticulously records kings who reigned for tens of thousands of years before a great flood swept the world, followed by a second set of rulers whose terms still stretched for centuries. This is not a metaphor or a poetic exaggeration. The scribes who pressed these words into wet clay presented them as straightforward, factual history. They were documenting a timeline of their own past, one that operates on a scale completely alien to our own understanding of human civilization. The list does more than just record impossibly long lives. It directly associates these pre-flood rulers with the very foundations of advanced knowledge. It credits them with establishing the first cities, with introducing the complex concepts of law and writing, and with bringing the arts of civilization to humanity. Most strikingly for our search, it explicitly links these ancient god-kings to the mastery of metallurgy. It describes a time when they taught humans how to work with bronze and gold, metals that, according to modern archaeology, should not have been in widespread use for thousands of years after these supposed rulers walked the earth. This creates a direct and unsettling conflict. Our scientific dating methods, from carbon dating of artifacts to stratigraphic analysis of ruins, paint a very specific picture of human progress. They show a slow, gradual climb from the Stone Age to the Copper Age, and finally to the Bronze Age. The Sumerian king list shatters this gradual timeline. It inserts a fully developed, metallurgically advanced civilization right at the very beginning of the human story, before what we consider history even started. This is not a diagram of a physical object, but a diagram of time itself, and it suggests our timeline is fundamentally wrong. It forces us to confront a terrifying possibility. What if the Sumerians, one of the earliest cultures we know of, were not the inventors of civilization, but merely the inheritors? What if they were looking back at the ruins of a much older, much more advanced world, and trying to make sense of its colossal remains by recording the names of its builders, whose lifespans and achievements had become the stuff of legend? The list is a ghost story written in clay, a whisper from the past insisting that our deepest history is buried far deeper than we have ever dared to dig. From the intricate gears of the Antikythera mechanism to the biological blueprint of the genetic disk, these 25 diagrams form a constellation of impossibility scattered across our historical timeline. They are not random errors or lucky guesses. They are a pattern, a persistent, whispering suggestion that our story of human progress is incomplete. Each artifact, each impossible alloy and inexplicable machine stands as a monument to a question we have yet to answer. Were these the products of a lost human civilization, a golden age whose achievements were almost entirely erased by some cataclysm, leaving behind only these cryptic fragments? Do they point to a history of extraterrestrial contact, a seeding of knowledge from the stars that was later mythologized and forgotten? Or do they simply reveal the vast, humbling gaps in our own understanding, proof that ancient cultures possessed wisdom and techniques that we, in our arrogance, have dismissed as impossible? These are not questions with easy answers, but they are questions worth asking. They invite us to look at the past not as a closed book of settled facts, but as a dynamic, living field of discovery, where every new dig site and every re-examined artifact has the power to rewrite everything we thought we knew. History is not a passive subject to be memorized. It is an active investigation, a grand puzzle waiting for its next piece to be found. What other secrets lie buried just beneath the surface of the accepted narrative, waiting for the right person to uncover them? The search is far from over. Share which of these mysteries resonates most with you in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the greatest enigmas of our past.